We're going to talk about something that not a lot of podcasters really address, and it's something that more of us should be thinking about, the idea of accessibility with our digital content. And joining us to talk about that is Maxwell Ivey, known as the Blind Blogger. He also runs the Accessibility Advantage. You can find it at the accessibilityadvantage.com. And for as long as I've known Maxwell, which has been a few years since we first met at a MapCon here in South Jersey, maybe 5 years ago, he has always been out there trying to help podcasters make their content more accessible so that everybody can enjoy what it is that you are doing. And we are excited to chat with him about that today. Maxwell, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Matthew. I'm happy to be here. It's always great when I get to spend time with one of my favorite leaders of the podcast industry. So thank you.
Oh, is that person here? I don't see them. Well, I want to definitely talk about accessibility. I want to talk about all the different things that podcasters can and should be doing. But, you know, the Blind Blogger is such a unique moniker for someone to have. Tell us a little bit about how you started with that and where you're at these days with your digital media adventure.
Right. So, you know that I started life as a carnival owner. After my dad's death, I transitioned to brokering used rides on the internet. As social media came along, I was building a community there. And as a former shorthand, people on LinkedIn and Facebook just referred to me as the Blind Blogger, because in 2009, 10, along in there weren't a lot of people with disabilities, period, on the internet, and very few of them were putting themselves out there as openly as I was. You know, I like to tell people I wasn't the most talented, most prolific, or most consistent, but I was the most shameless. So people knew me, and they hung that name on me, and it stuck. And when I decided to start a second website to talk more about being a blind entrepreneur, it was the natural choice. And it stuck with me. And, you know, the only thing I regret about the Blind Blogger is in some cases it's a little limiting, but I think I've finally found the right balance with the old and the new. I just tell people, hey, I'm the Blind Blogger, Maxwell Ivey. Now let's talk about accessibility, because the truth is I've been talking about accessibility for years. It's just, I'm surprised you and everybody else didn't tell me that was what I was doing while I was doing it, because up until 4 years ago, I really didn't realize just how much of an impact I was having, how big an advocate I was for making the internet and content on the internet more inclusive. And it was only as I started to get work thrown at me, basically, in the area of writing on the subject of accessibility, that I realized, wait a minute, I've been doing this stuff for 17 years now. And I am the expert, and it's about time I lean into that role and start to be recognized for it more directly and get paid for it, of course.
We always want to get paid for our good work. Before we jump into the work of accessibility specifically and what you've been doing over at the Accessibility Advantage, because we do like to talk about technology and equipment and tools, I'm wondering what has been some of the best innovations specifically in podcasting as far as equipment that allows you to have a show and be successful with your content creation journey?
Well, I hate to spoil such a great question, but I am not a high-tech person, and even living vicariously through my friends with disabilities who are high-tech persons, there haven't been a lot of big-time innovations that have made having a podcast easier. I do have one thing that I'm using right now that I really love, although it's not as smart as it advertises itself to be. I have an Interlink 360 video camera, and it uses artificial intelligence to stay focused on my face and keep me centered in the camera view. Now, it took over an hour with a sighted person to configure it where it actually knows what it's supposed to do and when it's supposed to do it. But it does work really well now. So I can move forward and back and side, and it'll still have me in focus. And this is important because I don't have complete control of my space. And as a blind person, one of the most important things to you is consistency. How do you create a consistent workspace or a consistent routine? And so I can't guarantee the furniture will be in the same place every time. But now I have a camera where I don't have to worry about that anymore. So that's an innovation. I would say that some of the new microphones that I haven't gotten to try yet are probably using artificial intelligence. And I would also say just more people getting involved and becoming familiar with accessibility so that I don't have to spend as much time getting them up to speed as to what I need. And, speaking of technology, I think you were there at the event where I won that very nice microphone at Joe's event. And I took it home and I used it twice, and then it broke. And a while after I posted those 2 episodes, people said, Max, we loved your interviews, but the audio wasn't synced. The volume, we'd have to raise the volume to hear your guest, and then we'd have to lower it so you didn't blast us out of the room. So sometimes technology can be very challenging if you have a disability, but I feel like Zoom, Google Meet, and the other meeting platforms have done a good job of helping the novice and the disabled balance their sound quality so that people can really enjoy the audio and concentrate solely on the message.
And certainly there's a lot of post-production tools as well that will fix a lot of problems that might come up with when you have difficulties in recording your content. So let's talk about accessibility in the podcasting space. And I think people are going to hear this and they're going to think, well, podcasts are an audio medium. What is the big challenge for a blind blogger to listen to a podcast? Tell us, what are the biggest hurdles that you come across when either you're trying to find specific content or you've landed on a specific show or network or program, but there are other things that could be done better to make your experience enjoying it a little bit smoother.
Right. So I'm going to come at this from 2 points. I'm going to start with the positive, what podcast hosts can be doing that will help them take advantage of accessibility to build a better connection with their audience. One of the big trends in podcasting is people recording in video and then outputting the audio. The problem is depending on who you ask, anywhere from 70 to 85% of your audience is only going to listen to your podcast. So they don't have the advantage of your video. So the one thing that would really help your audience is if you would do what is called an audio description. That's where you tell them a little bit about what you look like, your background, what you're wearing, what your set looks like. If you have a dog or a cat that thinks it's part of the show and will make an occasional appearance, describing them. But more importantly, if there are head shakes, if there are facial expressions, if there are things that happen during the video recording that you think to yourself, if I had seen that happen, it would have affected me emotionally, or it would have entertained me or made me laugh or something. If I had seen that, it would have affected the way I experienced this show. Then you want to describe those things as they happen as best as you can. Sometimes you'll have to describe them afterwards. Sometimes you may want to put it in the post-production show notes. But these are the kind of things that your audience, who, by the way, they're just as blind as I am, most of them, they can't appreciate what was going on screen while you were recording this audio that you're outputting to your player. So I highly encourage people to do an audio description. If at the end of this recording you want me to do mine for you to give them an example, I can do that. That's one thing I would say, because it allows you to build a stronger connection with your audience, which leads to more loyal listeners, which leads to downloads, reviews, and hopefully email subscribers or people who will buy whatever it is you're selling the next time you have something to sell. So
well, let's not wait. Let's get a sample of an audio description now, so that while we're thinking about it, people can understand what it is that you're referring to.
Well, I was hoping you would say that, but you being the host, I didn't want to step over. So, so I am a 59-year-old white Caucasian male, and I say that because I'm a pale person. I have medium-length brown curly hair, brown eyes. I'm wearing a light blue button-down dress shirt, a black tie. I'm sitting in a generic office chair in my bedroom, which also doubles as my recording space. I have my background blacked out or blurred out, whatever the big kids term for it is. So there's nothing back there. No dogs, cats, children, etc. No monograms or logos on my clothing. No visible tattoos. Those are the kind of things you would want to describe for people in the beginning of your introduction. And of course, for me, since I have a disability, at the end, I would mention that I am almost totally blind, having retinitis pigmentosa, otherwise known as RP.
Okay. Thank you for sharing all that with us and explaining what a good visual, what a good audio description is for a podcast, something that maybe more people can be thinking about in the future. So, what was your second point on this front, as far as trying to enjoy podcasts, with accessibility challenges?
Right. So the most important thing is your player and where they're going to find your player. So if you're using one of the top podcasting platforms, the odds are their players' buttons are going to be accessible. I have not been on any of the majors where that's been a case. It probably will be more likely to be the case with a free hosting provider or with somebody who is new to the industry as a hosting provider. But you do want to check and see if the buttons are properly labeled. It's easier if you have access to a screen reader or if you use a product like Waves or the free checker at audioeye.com. Either of those can help you determine if your website or your player's website is accessible, at least for the most part, probably about 70%, 60%. It'll tell you, at least that much of it, whether it's right or wrong. So your podcast player being able to pause, stop, fast forward, rewind, being able to share your content by clicking the buttons or by subscribing to whatever their favorite platform is, those things need to be tested. And then the website where you locate it. You want to make the podcast player on your website. I would say it should be the only thing on the page, unless you're using a plugin that allows you to embed your player on your homepage and then have it display the latest episode within that player, which I understand a lot of people do that now as well. In that case, you just want to make sure that there are as few elements on the homepage as possible alongside the player. So when people use adaptive technology, whether it is somebody who is slightly visually impaired that has a screen magnifier, or somebody who's more impaired like me that uses a screen reader, or you're talking about hearing impaired, or people using automated switch devices because they have a lack of limbs or motor control. Regardless, it takes people like me longer to navigate your websites. So the simpler design that you have, the fewer elements that you use on any one page, the better, because the fewer things I have to pass through in order to find the one thing that I came to your website to do, which as a podcaster, that one thing should be your podcast. So if I have to navigate through 3 different pages, or if I have to navigate through 25 links before I find the link to this week's episode or the player for where I can listen to any of your episodes, that's just making things harder for me and for people like me. So that's why I was talking about adaptive technology. And in some cases, the adaptive technology also can lead to some help for people that are wanting to bring more traction to their websites, because after you talk about navigating a website and focusing on a simple, clean design with a minimal number of elements, one of the next things you're going to talk about is images, because as podcasters, we've all got artwork for our shows, we've got artwork for our episodes, we've got artwork for our profile on our homepage, and all those images need to have the alternative text tag that describes the image for people using a screen reader. But those descriptions are also indexed by Alexa, Google, Siri. All the major search engines are indexing those. And the only problem I have when I tell people about that is they want to stuff keywords into their image descriptions. So I tell people you have 150 to 180 characters, depending on the search engine, that will actually be indexed. So let's try to split that in half and have half be the name of your company and what you do, and the other half be what's actually in the image. And that way you get the best of both worlds. You can drive traffic, and I am sure that you probably spent a lot of time, effort, stress, and maybe even a fair bit of money into creating the images that are on your website. So why not make sure that everybody visiting your website can appreciate them?
You were talking about what our page should look like. is it best practices, or would it be advisable if somebody has the resources to almost make like a separate page that would be more accessible friendly versus their main podcast listening page? Just because, there's something about the design and form and function that people look for when they want to create a website, but also, what is best for the entire audience so that everybody can enjoy the content and not get bogged down in, tons of details and tons of these accessibility features kind of overloading our circuits with all the different things that we have on the site.
Right. Well, I personally don't believe that anyone should be creating a second version of your site. I know that the larger corporations like Audible and Amazon, I know that they do it, but I often find that the version they've created specifically for people using adaptive equipment turn out to be not all that great. And some of that's because they don't have the right people providing information to the developers on their team. And some of it is just lack of time or funds or lack of care. I also don't believe that people should have to install a plugin or a widget on their website to make it accessible. The truth is, most things, other than the alt text descriptions and the audio descriptions for videos and audio files, other than those, everything you do to improve accessibility is stuff that you should be doing to improve the user experience of everybody else that visits your website anyway.
Okay, that is fair. What about when it comes to transcripts? How often do you find yourself using those?
I don't personally use them that much unless there's something in the episode that I plan on using in a later talk or presentation of some kind, but they aren't targeted to me. Transcripts are great for people that have a hearing disability, but transcripts and closed captions are one of those things that have a large benefit to the able-bodied community. Here's a statistic that I recently found where people under the age of 35, that 37% of that group will not watch a video on any platform unless that video has closed captions. Now, we both know that's because they're most likely going to be watching some of those videos when they shouldn't be watching those videos, and they don't want people overhearing them. But that's the truth. There's a large part of the society that is depending on closed captions because it just fits their lifestyle. And the same thing applies with audio descriptions. I have sighted people who will tell me, Max, if I have a good audio description during a movie or a TV show, once they discover that they're there on their TVs, if I have a good audio description, I don't have to look at the TV. I can go do other stuff. I can follow the plot, and in some cases, can even follow the plot better because the narrators will tell about stuff on the screen that maybe you missed because your focus was not totally on the screen for that 1 or 2 seconds where you needed to see something in the corner of the screen or whatever. So I would say that those types of things, they make life easier for a lot of your people who don't have a disability. Another good example is the text, size, font, color contrasts on your website and on your website pages. If you take a high contrast color, like say black on white or black on yellow, and you give the user the opportunity to invert the text so that you have a white text on black background, that becomes much more easy to read and to navigate in very bright or very dark light for people who don't have a vision issue.
That is absolutely fair. And I do see a lot of folks who are switching over to dark mode often when they're at their computer. And so I could see why that would just be something good for people to think about, even if they're not necessarily thinking about full accessibility, concerns and whatnot. So what is it like to work with you? If somebody's hearing this and they're thinking, man, Maxwell's got a great point. There's a lot of these things that we should be doing, but we just don't know how to. How do they work with you? What does engagement look like?
Well, it starts with reviewing their current platform, whether that's a website, an app, or their podcast, and seeing where they're at now, giving them a breakdown of where they stand on the issues and giving them a prioritized list of what needs to be done right now what are things that are basic necessities of accessibility that have to happen, or what are things that we can work on later. I'm definitely a big fan of doing this at the speed that the website owner's team can handle as far as time and money. And sometimes what we have to do is we have to say, okay, these things we can't fix now, but what we can do is we can come up with workarounds that we can teach to users who have a disability, and we can make those available either on the website or post a note that if they send us an email or click a button, that we can make those available to them so they can navigate the accessibility issues in the short term while the owner works on that. Then once those are corrected, then we can go on to something else that needs to be done. We can also reevaluate things that have been improved to make sure that later additions to the website haven't compromised the accessibility that we just built. I firmly believe that accessibility is a progress and not a perfection, and so it is one of those things where you're going to work through it and hopefully get to the point where you're in the high 90s% of accessibility. And thanks to my education, you understand how adaptive tech users will navigate the internet, so you'll be able to maintain it and avoid causing problems to it going forward. One other thing I do that most people in this field, I feel like they're dropping the ball for their clients, is the disability community. We love to support businesses that are making the effort to be inclusive, but most business owners, for some reason, are reluctant to proclaim, announce, share with the world the efforts that they're putting into being inclusive. And I don't have any idea what their reasons are, but I just know that they just don't feel right talking about the work they've done or the work they've had done. So during the process, I'll do blog posts, social media posts. We'll do podcast episodes for some clients, because it isn't just about improving the accessibility, because part of the point is making it accessible because it'll make it easier for everybody else that will visit your website or your products or services. But a big part of this is improving the lives of people with disabilities, and it really doesn't improve their lives if they don't know about it. So evaluation, advice on correction, reevaluation, promotion, that's what it looks like to work with Max.
And if you would like to do so, the accessibilityadvantage.com. We are chatting with Maxwell Ivey, the blind blogger. Max, before we let you go, I have a couple of questions that we like to ask everybody on the show. And of course, this first question is basically the main topic of our entire conversation. So hopefully I can get you to look just a little bit outside of it. But is there a place in the podcasting space where we could improve upon? Are there things that you would like to see done better, whether it's on creation, distribution, marketing, anything like that?
I think it's the same answer I would give if we were talking about the broadcast media. We need more people with disabilities in front of cameras and microphones. We need more attention and more spotlights being placed on those people, because there are lots of blind, deaf, hearing impaired, paraplegics, quadriplegics, lots of people with disabilities out there who have podcasts or are in the process of starting podcasts, but there still aren't a lot of, what's that expression, faces that look like mine or out there in the podcasting world. So I think that would be something that would be an improvement. More people with disabilities on stages at conferences would help, but there again, that's partly the event organizers and it's partly the disabled people, because y'all can't say yes to us if we don't ask. So I would say those would be the kind of things I would think about. And I just want to drop in a short little plug here for Chris Kramitsis and his team at FODFest Expo, including Nick Pavlidis, because they invited me to record a video they will be posting shortly to help their presenters understand how to create more accessible and inclusive slides and QR codes. And as part of that, I also told them about doing audio descriptions. So PodFest in January, there's an organization that's making the effort to have their event be inclusive. So I want to get their name out there. I hope that's okay.
Absolutely. I love Chris. I've always been a fan of his and the work that he's done. And I've always enjoyed my times at Podfest conferences, and actually hoping that I got my chance to go down this year in January to go check out the latest one that they are working on. So always happy to give Chris and his team a shout out. They do some really, really great work. All right, this one is a little probably going to be a little bit trickier as well, but is there any technology that you would like to get your hands on that would help you with podcasting, whether it's something that exists that, just might be out of your budget, or something maybe that somebody needs to create for you?
I think there are two things I want to get my hands on for different reasons. The number one thing on my wish list is a digital braille display. And what the way they work is you connect them with your desktop or your mobile devices by Bluetooth, and they use a series of magnets and metal pins to simulate braille characters. And the reason I want one is because when I record my podcast, I have to memorize all this stuff. I have to create tricks for myself so that I can remember all this stuff. But if I had access to a digital braille display, I would be able to read whatever I needed to read to refresh my memory on while I'm interviewing or being interviewed without the screen reader, that computer voice, getting in the middle of the conversation. So that's like my number one thing. And then my second thing would be I would really like to find a camera that would allow me to do better as far as recording events when I'm away from my house. I've spoken at a couple of conferences where I don't have videos of great talks because they weren't recording, and it's not really easy for me to set up to record. So having a mobile answer for recording video and or audio would be the second thing on my list.
I'm going to have a nice chat with you right after this conversation about just such an idea. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully we can help you out on that front.
All right. I like that. I hope you can.
And lastly, is there a podcast in your playlist right now that you are listening to that, no matter what is happening, when the new episode comes out, you're stopping what you're listening to or dropping everything to go check it out? It could be more than one podcast too.
Okay. The easy one is one called Your Own Pay. It's done by a good friend of mine named Michael Babcock from Oregon. He's been in the disability space for probably 35 years or more. And the reason I like it is because he's got all the scoop on all the latest technology and how that can be used or not be used by people with disabilities. He's the only guy in my community who is also an expert on Android as well as iOS when it comes to accessibility. And so he's continuing to be in my ear telling me, Max, Android's almost there. You need to start thinking about switching from your iPhone. So Your Own Pay is one of them. And then I would say I can't think of the name of the podcast, but I always listen to Alex Sanfilippo's podcast.
Oh, yes. Alex is from Podmatch. Success Stories or... Oh, man, what is his podcast? You know what?
I know. It bothers me.
He deserves to hear... he deserves the credit for his podcast.
Hey, pull his name up on LinkedIn. It's right there in his profile.
Podcasting Made Simple.
There you go. So Alex Sanfilippo at Podcast Made Simple. He's been a mentor and a friend, and his podcast always includes such great guests, and they share stuff that you're like, okay, this should be a good interview. And then you listen to it and you're like, wait a minute. That was so much more than I ever thought I was going to get from this particular guest. I mean, he just wrings them dry, or they come in and empty their brains for him. I don't know how it works, but I just know that you just get so much every time you listen to one of his guests.
Yeah, Alex is someone who is doing a lot of very interesting things in the space, and already chatting with him, trying to make sure we can get him on the show. So very glad you brought him up, as well as our buddy Chris Cremizzo. So
I'm trying to get him on my show too, because I've been the accessibility advisor to Pod Lottery and Podmatch now for a few years, and in his case, it's been longer than it probably would have been because they're continuing to grow and build upon what they started at. But the thing about Podmatch is I'm really impressed with not just the work they've done to make it accessible, but the the point of their heart as far as they really want this to be the best thing for podcasters, including podcasters who have a disability and people with disabilities who want to be guests. So, I've been helping him out for a while now, and I want him to come on my podcast to talk about accessibility on his platform. And he's like, Max, check back with me in December. I'm like, okay. His tech guy is a gentleman named Jesse, and I don't know Jesse's last name. I'm sorry, but I spend a lot of time back and forth with Jesse. I've been trying to get him on my podcast as well to talk about Podmatch and accessibility. And so far, I'm still in, just keep checking back with us, Max. When our schedule's open, we'll come, so.
He is a rather busy guy. And the next chance I get to chat with him, I'll nudge him to, go on your podcast as well and, make an appearance there. Once again, we've been chatting with Maxwell Ivey, the blind blogger, also an Accessibility Advantage. You can go to theaccessibilityadvantage.com to check out the great work that he does. And just, think about Max. He's out here trying to enjoy content, and he's not trying to make you pay an arm and a leg, for your content to be more user-friendly. He just wants it so that everybody can enjoy it and, share with the rest of the world. So, Max, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us and for doing what it is that you do.
Well, thank you, Matthew. I appreciate you making a spot for me on the show and for understanding the value or the potential value of accessibility to your audience. So thank you for that.